Good early morning, everybody. Uneducated Economist here, talking about the silver rebound that is underway right now and what that really means for the economy, what it is that you need to do about your position, and how it is that you're supposed to handle this news. Because I see a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt that is now pushed into the mainstream media. In fact, last night I saw this like breaking news silver rally or something running across CNBC, and I'm like, holy moly, how much is it? And then I go and I look, and it's up. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's up quite a bit, but it's not like it's some dramatic amount considering what it is that we have experienced over the last few weeks here. It wasn't that much, but yet it was just breaking news, right? So everybody's fearful, everybody's attention is brought to the silver market, and everybody's kind of focused in on that, looking at it as the dollar demise, weakening dollar, failing dollar, and then its evidence inside of the silver market. One of the things that I have been focused in on as far as like what happens with silver is that the demand for silver as far as an industrial metal should really have it much higher than where it is today. I mean, even if you just think about it from the pulling out of the ground ratio to gold, it's a 10 to 1 ratio, and then 50% of it goes to industrial use, leaves it at a 5 to 1 ratio. I mean, we're talking silver should be much closer to $500 to $1,000 an ounce. So at $80, to me, it's still pretty cheap on the grand scheme of things, although it is a market high, not the high that we experienced just a few days ago last week, but it is quite elevated. So, in the grand scheme of things, is it showing fear in the market? I believe so. I think these market volatility, the dramatic swings, is people very much in fear of what it is that they expect coming into the future, and then they're trying to protect themselves by moving into the silver trade or positioning themselves in silver, and then you see a lot of volatility that starts to take place on that. That is a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Don't get me wrong. There is a manipulation market that is coming to an end, and I don't necessarily think it's going to come to a complete end, but as far as the dramatic swings that we are seeing, I think that is a result of market manipulation that is happening within it. But overall, we are going to find that the economy itself is on one real common trajectory, and that is a separation between the rich and the poor. And it will always go that way so long as there's ever increasing amounts of new money. So if you have a weakening dollar, that's another way of thinking of inflated dollars or more money printing or expansion of the money supply, or however you want to say it. And this is going to weaken the dollar overall. And that whole idea, that concept, is going to cause separation between the rich and the poor. Silver is a good way of protecting yourself over the long run if you dollar cost average into it. The silver trade can be incredibly volatile. So unless you know what you're doing, and most people don't, and most people are doing it off of emotion, that's why they're even getting into it in the first place, end up losing money because they don't position themselves accordingly, and they're doing it off of emotion. So when you do it on a dollar cost averaging, you're not really doing it with emotion. Up, down, sideways doesn't really matter. You're just adding to your stack over time. And as you do that, you can build up a really decent amount of savings. And I call it savings because it really is savings to me. I don't have any intentions on spending it. And really, it turns more into an insurance policy and not necessarily an investment. Because if I did ever turn it in, it's probably going to be for emergency purposes, or because I'm going to use it to increase my wealth into something else. I see the buying opportunity that just makes it too good. But overall, the actual holding of silver is an insurance policy against that third party claim. And the higher that the price goes of this spot price, it only makes the insurance policy that much better. The only way to really have that insurance policy is to do it over time with no intentions of selling it. So when I look at silver and I think of silver and I see the silver rally, I think to myself, man, this is just making it easier for me to sleep at night, but it really makes it difficult to add to the position. So to me, it's like a two-edged sword. I mean, it's like I really like the stuff, but then I really want it to be cheap. So, it hurts both ways when you think about it. Now, for those who are like really hoping and dreaming and praying for it to go up so that they can make a bunch of money off of it, That can really be done in the paper game, so I don't really think of it as far as like an investment in that fashion because it could really be anything at that point. It doesn't necessarily have to be just silver. So people who recognize and see the fundamentals within silver and recognize the silver market and think that they can make a lot of money off of it can probably do quite well inside of the silver trades that are in like ETFs or just anything on the stock market there. But again, that's like more speculative moves inside of the short-term run and how it is that you can make money off of it. The physical isn't necessarily an easy way of doing that. Now, I also shared down in the description a link to an AP article, an Associated Press article, talking about a lot of abundance of imported items going into South America. And now, when I read through this article, I thought to myself, man, this is so good. Anybody who follows like the Cantillon effect or just follows my channel or anything would read that article and think, holy moly, man, this is definitely the economic forces playing out here. Let me see if I can bring up the article so we can read some of the quotes here. Here's some of the quotes that come out of this article. I'm just going to read a few of them because they really just line up. And when you hear it, it's just like, man, if that ain't the Cantillon effect, I don't know what is. But it goes like this. Latin America has solid middle class, relatively high purchasing power, and real demand. Bang, man. Like, what does that mean? It means you're going to have a strong consumer right in the middle class. And why do they have this strong middle class consumer? It's because they're producers and savers within South America. And that's how they get this strong middle class. Goes on to say this, those conditions make it one of the easiest places for China to offload its excess industrial production. All right. Again, how do we learn about what ends up happening when you have a strong middle class who raises their standard of living and they start buying a lot of consumption, right? Or moving into a lot of consumption. Foreign production starts moving in. These conditions make it the easiest place for China to offload excess industrial production. See, this isn't necessarily a political move or anything else. This is underlying economic forces playing out, right? I mean, this lines right up with Cantillon, right? Cantillon effect. Goes on to say this: the Chinese have having. I have a hell of a time speaking. You know, it's amazing I even have a YouTube channel if I can't even say words. Okay. The Chinese have invaded us in terms of merchandise, right? Again, if you are a strong middle class, raising your standard of living, and you increase your product or your consumption of the foreign production that is out there, what is it going to do? Right? Chinese invaded in terms of merchandise. This is exactly the same thing that happened in the United States when we were a manufacturing powerhouse who raised our standard of living. It's the same story. It's a little different. I mean, everybody's going to tell a little different story, but it's essentially the same economic forces playing out here. The next quote goes like this. It goes, we're operating at historically low capacities as imports break record highs, right? Eventually, it's going to flip the switch, right? And it's going to be a major problem for these nations because they're not necessarily ones who can continue on with ever increasing amounts of consumption by the issuance of debt because nobody's necessarily going to be trusting these South American nations in order to go into debt and to continue to be a consumer, right? So this is going to be a problem for them if it eventually flips the switch, right? And that's it. That will eventually happen here, right? So it says we're operating at historically low capacities as imports break record highs. The last quote says here, we're under indiscriminate attack. Under attack, right? It's just like, well, you're not necessarily under attack, although it feels like that. It's not an attack. What it is, it's an underlying economic force that is playing out that feels very uncomfortable, and it is going to end. It's going to end in your demise eventually. I mean, I don't mean to talk badly about your nations or anything like that. I am very much, like, feel for you guys. However, this is going to play out eventually, and I don't know how long it's going to take. And if you're very aware of the situation and don't move too much into luxuries, which is very doubtful, if you have a higher income and higher standard of living, you're going to be moving to luxuries. That's exactly what that means, is the higher standard of living moves into luxuries. If that continues, you're going to have ever increasing amounts of foreign production coming in, which is evident here within these comments, right? The Chinese have invaded us in terms of merchandise. So if you think about it in this fashion, eventually you're going to get to a point where it tips, right? And you're not going to be able to bring in any new money to buy the new merchandise because you're getting in new money from your own production that you are doing. You're not necessarily doing it from debt issuance. And if you were the United States, you could go into ever increasing amounts of debt issuance because the rest of the world is buying your debt and they demand your debt in order to do their own transactions. They don't have that same confidence in these South American nations. So when that point comes and they cannot issue out new money, the collapse begins. And you can see it kind of happening. I mean, how long does it take? I don't know. I mean, that's anybody's guess. But you can see the symptoms of it are now playing out right here. So it's only a matter of time before it takes place, unless something dramatic changes within the system. And I don't know what that could possibly be that would change the forces because they just don't change. These things just play out. Excuse me, guys. I'm sorry. Um, these things just eventually just play out. And so when we have to look at this stuff and we think about what it is that's going to be coming to the future, I think about these individuals down here. Like if you go and read in fact, let me just bring it up. Like, I mean, there's some of the comments inside of it are just like talking about Timu. Let me see if I can find the lady who was like talking about it. So, oops, okay, come on now. There we go. Chinese, okay. We're operating at a historic. The number of Chinese products arriving into Argentina in ultra-fast fashion is deeply worrying. It's an international phenomenon, but it's now nearly beginning to have dramatic importance here. Talking about Temu, it says the Temu spokesperson said it has been giving Latin America local businesses, quote, access to a low-cost, scalable online channel that was previously out of reach for many of them, right? Here you go, man. Here's the catalog. Go shopping, right? And it's at Temu. So what it means is that they are taking their money and it's being exported to China. And then the Chinese stuff moves in. Now, that's cool if you're the United States who's trying to export money, but it's not cool if you're a South American nation who's trying to figure out how it is that you're going to have ever increasing amounts of new money coming in order to maintain your direction of elevation and standard of living. And if you can't bring in ever increasing amounts of new money from your foreign production that you're doing, from selling your merchandise to foreigners, and that foreign production is now competing against that, if you cannot, right, figure out a way to get new money in, you're going to fall into poverty and misery. It's just a matter of time, right? So here this Temu stuff is now moving in, and they're like, oh, hey, look, you got access to low cost scalable online channel to the previously out of reach for many of them. Well, what that meant is if you didn't have access to Temu, then you didn't export your money either, right? And so now here you are getting, again, the South American nations, they have Temu coming in and money moving out. All right. Why do I find this more important than the silver story? I wanted to be on silver. I just wanted to give you guys just a little bit. I didn't even really want to talk about this part. I wanted to kind of come up with this for my lunch video, but it was just too good. So I guess it was just too good. There's a comment in here where there's this lady who talks about how awesome it is to shop at Temu. Oh, well, I can't find it now. Respects the importance of local and policy trade. Oh, well. Anyway, when I think about what it is that's happening now and how it is that silver can protect you from all this stuff, because really the story that's being told down in South America is essentially the same one that was being told in the United States. The only difference is the United States had the debt issuance that we can now sell to the rest of the world, so we can have ever increasing amounts of new money that comes in. The South American nations aren't going to experience the same thing. Now, there is a part in here where China is lending them money, which is pretty interesting to think about because I think they're doing that in dollars. Right, and I couldn't find the actual evidence of that, but I believe that would be the case, especially since most of the Belt and Road Initiative stuff is done in dollars, right? And so Mexico deficit, China is the second largest trading partner to the U.S., reached 120 billion in 2024, with exports of those including raw materials such as copper and its concentrates, electronics, equipment, and agricultural goods totaling only about 9 billion. Um, Oh, here we go. Okay, China provided loans and grants to countries in Latin America and the Caribbean in 2014 through 2023 with roughly $153 billion, the largest source of official sector financing for the region, compared to approximately 50 billion of the US provided. So they provided 153 billion, the US provided 50 billion. And now it does make me wonder. And I can't prove it because I can't find it in here because I don't know exactly which loans they're talking about, but I can find evidence in other places of other things similar to this that all this is being done in dollars, like US dollars, right? So it doesn't have anything to do with the United States. This Chinese companies, banks, government, whatever it is now lending money to South American nations so that they can build up their infrastructure, and they're doing it in dollars. And if they default on those loans, all that stuff ends up going to China, right? It ends up becoming ownership of China. I don't know how many people see that. That is like crazy to think. That's if you really want to dive deep into that, there's a document that the Federal Reserve put out called Dollar Funding Stresses in China that really talks deeply about that, and the issues that would come up if the dollar was to strengthen too much, and it would ultimately just be this huge benefit to China. So weakening the dollar, I mean, or having a weak dollar prevents that outcome in a way. I mean, yeah. Um, Let me see. I want to put that away. I was going to talk about sober. I wasn't going to necessarily talk about this. But anyway, I think this is important too. And I think this is really a way to kind of keep an eye on the overall economy and the underlying economic forces. And one of the reasons why you should be getting into sober. Ultimately, I guess it's like, another one of those things that, you should use to solidify your ideas on why it is that you can continue to dollar cost average into your insurance policy, but then also be able to possibly make moves off of this. I mean, these people will never, ever, 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 ever in any of these articles ever talk about the Cantillon effect, but that's okay. If you recognize and understand what's happening, then they don't need to say it. You just need to look for the evidence of it, and this is it. This article totally does it. Silver trade, on the other hand, that's going to be a little bit different because understanding silver, like a lot of times, here's the thing, a lot of times people talk about, oh, we need to go back to a gold standard or use silver as our currency and stuff like that. And I get very concerned with this idea because just like what's happening here in South America or whatever, with the Chinese imports, it's the same thing that we're going to have an issue here in the United States with, and that is we import more than we export. And when that eventually happens to the South America, they will fall into poverty and misery again because they don't have any way of bringing in new money outside of their production. And if they are bringing in more production than they're exporting, then they don't get new money. They export all their money and then they crash. So the United States doesn't necessarily face that, but we are going to face a problem that if it continues if it continues on in this fashion, we're going to have this huge separation between the rich and the poor. And the only way to really protect yourself from that is through asset allocation, right? You have to be in something that is going to grow over time. Now, whether that's like rental properties, which is probably the number one best place that you could ever possibly be for a number of reasons, it doesn't really matter what you're in, so long as it's going to be something that is going to be paying you over time. Whether, like dividend bank paying stocks themselves, because you really think about it, when you're investing in the stock market, you're investing in a business and that business can grow over time. So that's another way of getting into it. Dividend paying stocks, bonds are a simple way of doing it if you're in the right bond. Business, owning the business itself, educating yourself. These are ways that you try to figure out how to get more money in. Now, these things that you put out there to acquire the assets that you acquire, I cannot tell you how critically important it is to move into this as quickly as possible, as soon as possible. And it's going to be risky, right? You might screw up, and take the screw up as a learning lesson. Like if you're going to pay for an education, you knew that money wasn't coming back unless you use your education, right? So if you put money into a stock or something and it fails, learn from that, right? That's a learning lesson. Don't put all your money into it, right? That's kind of silly, then, unless you want a really heavy education, a really expensive one. just, put a little bit in over time. I mean, it's so easy to do it now. There are so many options, so many opportunities to do this. But when you move into something like silver, what you are doing is removing yourself from all that, right? So you can be in that or out of that. And the only way to get out of that is essentially precious metals. Like you can use Bitcoin to a lesser extent, and then, you can kind of get creative with other, firearms and, tools and stuff, like whatever physical items out there. But really, nothing has been proven as effective as gold and silver has. It's just 5,000 year history, right? It's kind of hard to beat that. So this is really ultimately the place that you have to go to in order to get yourself out of that third party risk. But if you want to be in the asset allocation where you move yourself onto the other side of the wedge, then you really have to be in something that is going to be paying you, not a speculative item that is going to be sold for a higher price, like that greater fool theory. And don't get offended by that. That's exactly how they call it out in the investment community, is when you buy a dumb asset, and it's not you being dumb, it means that it doesn't pay you a return on it, like a rental or a dividend or, yield of some sort. It's just an item you plan on selling it into the future. So essentially, you're going to try and find somebody who's going to pay a higher price for it. The greater fool theory. All right. So don't take offense to it. It's just what it's called. So when you buy into something that is like going to pay you over time, this asset allocation, these are the people who are moving themselves up onto the other side of the wedge. And now let me see if I have it here actually. There is a great I can't play it. The reason why I can't play it is because I don't want the copyright infringement, but there's a recent interview. I think it was the last interview with Epstein. And I'm not really into the whole thing, right? I just haven't really been listening to all the conspiracy stuff, and I had other things to pay attention to. I figured the truth will eventually come out. I don't need to, wrap my head around all the hype. But there was a particular part in this interview, because I listened to a good chunk of it this morning, and Deja Vu insisted. She sent it to me. She says, listen up to 10 minutes and tell me what you think, right? So I did. I listened to a little bit beyond that. But 8 to 10 minutes in that interview, he nails it. He absolutely calls it out. The people who have the assets are the ones who are in charge. They're way up here, and they're going to be moving up ever higher. Everybody else is going to be suffering the consequences. And now we have been just saying it over and over, and all kinds of people out here on YouTube talk about it. The mainstream media calls it a K-shaped economy, all kinds of, descriptions of it. But this is pure evidence of the Cantillon effect in full swing. And to think the reversal of this, it would be pain and misery for everyone. So the people who are in charge are not going to inflict pain and misery on themselves. And so what can you assume will happen, right? Ever increasing amounts of new money. When that new money pours into the system, what happens, right? The people who have the assets are the ones who are getting paid. Everybody else who has to work a day job barely makes it, because their day job is not enough to cut it in this day and age of asset allocation, consumer debtor economy. It doesn't work down there anymore. Like, you can work it and you can pay your bills and you can struggle and you can complain about it, but there's nothing else that is ever going to happen down there except for that. The people who are up in the asset allocation, the new money that pours in, it pours into that. They get to spend all this money. And so as they're spending money, they're buying foreign production. You're not involved in that. I mean, you're involved in the sense that you drive the truck to deliver the stuff, but you're not necessarily involved in the new money coming in and participating in that economy. You can kind of see the problem taking place here in that article I left down in the description. They're going to be facing that same problem soon. If they keep the new money pouring in some way, somehow they figure that out, maybe the world does trust their debt issuance, right? And they're able to issue out a bunch of debt, and that new money comes in, and they're able to pour that into the ever increasing amounts of foreign production. But I doubt that's going to happen down there in South America. I imagine that they're going to face the consequences of it, and they're going to fall into poverty and misery if they let this thing go, not let it, if it continues on in this fashion. This really is the responsibility of the middle class people not moving into luxuries. They should be buying into production and savings. Now, I'm not trying to give them advice, but if you are a producer who is holding back on their expenditures and then moving in to a secure rate of interest beyond that of your occupation, you will eventually become a property owner, and then you will have separated yourself from everybody else. I don't know how many, like, this isn't hard to understand. I mean, it is hard to understand, but it isn't hard to understand how many steps it takes. It only takes like five, right? You know? And so, I mean, when we see this playing out the way we do, we know what it is that it is that we ultimately need to do, right? Like we don't want to do. We want to go party. We want to go and spend the money on toys and have fun and enjoy ourselves and think like, man, everything is going to be cool in the end, right? But deep down inside, when you know these economic forces are playing out, you know what you have to do. You know that you have to cut back on your expenses so that you can secure that rate of interest beyond that of your occupation. And when you do that, you end up on the other side of the wedge, or at least closer to it so it's not so painful trying to struggle to pay your bills. And this is where the majority of the people are nowadays. And like I said, Epstein's that interview, like when I heard that part of it, the 8 to 10, I'm like, thank you, Deja. I really appreciate it. Like I wasn't going to listen to this, but since she sent it to me, I was just like, all right, fine. Yeah, I totally will do it now. So I did for, like I said, I didn't listen to the complete thing, but she told me to listen to the first 10 minutes of it, and I did, and it was really worth it too, because I think that that was very telling of the situation that we now face, not only here in the United States, but that these other nations are going to face soon in the future as well. If they do not pay attention as an individual to what it is that they could do to position themselves, they will fall victim to it. It's just the way, I mean, he even said it. Most people have no idea on what it is that's happening with the underlying economic forces. They understand their own finances just enough, but they don't understand what's happening outside of their own finances, and could barely grasp their own at best. And so to see like, how this stuff is actually happening here and what it is that we can do as individuals, I really honestly think that, just dollar cost average into these things that are outside of their control. And when you then see what it is that you can do to then position yourself in other ways, so you have your insurance and now you have, right? Because that's going to be somewhat risky. But then you also have to take on the idea that this issue is going to continue, right? Because they're not going to end the new money. That's really wishful thinking. I doubt it's going to happen. I mean, would you really go out there and stab yourself in the stomach? No, right? And that's exactly what people seem to think. If they're going to turn off the new money, that's dumb, right? Oh, we really should have deflation going on here. I mean, yeah, okay, great. Sounds wonderful for you, but they're not going to do that to themselves. And I don't think anybody in their right mind who was in that position would do that. Like, why would they do that to themselves? I don't understand why people would assume that. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And you have to like also understand that this is all credible threat. Like if we followed it down to the credible threat theory, like I have tried to share with everybody, then it would all make sense to everyone. Like even just recently I was talking with my bud Brody. I don't know if he's on here right now, but you know, was it Brody? No, it was Standard. Sorry, it was Standard Nursery. It was on a comment here. I'm sorry. It was Standard Nursery I was chatting with. And I thought to myself, I'm like, okay, wait a minute. We got these tariffs, right, that are up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is going to determine whether or not these tariffs are even legal, right? And so if they determine that they're illegal and they would have to all be refunded and all this other stuff, then that's this huge bonus to the corporations. It comes at the cost of the consumer. It's an obvious, like, bailout and, whatever. Okay, so we set that part aside, Mike, a little conspiracy theory on that. And then I got to thinking about it and I'm like, all this talk of the Supreme Court decision is just in being delayed, right? On top of it, it just adds power to the credible threat. Why doesn't the Trump just alleviate that whole credible threat by just initiating these game two plan and just making the Supreme Court essentially irrelevant? Unless you wanted the credible threat, right? Because right? Couldn't Trump just essentially just make that whole thing just go away to say, hey, we got this game two plan. Those tariffs that you say the Supreme Court is going to say is unconstitutional and illegal, that's okay. We got a game two plan. We can initiate tariffs. We don't need the Supreme Court. And I'm thinking, then why are you waiting? Why don't you just make the Supreme Court irrelevant right now? Unless you want the credible threat, right? Because now the Supreme Court has delayed it. Like they don't even make a decision on it. And as long as they don't make a decision, you can continue on using them. And it's just amazing to me to think, like, man, every single time he blows one of these things out of proportion and, like, we're going to come and blow you up and attack you and all kinds of craziness. And then it's just like Taco Tray comes out right after that. And I'm like, this is incredible to watch, you know? And I was just like, man, I couldn't write this any better. But anyway, credible threat theory again for the win. Right? And those who follow it and watch it, it makes a lot more sense to understand why it is they're doing it, is to raise that inflation expectation to pull the neutral interest rate ever higher. You know, I know this gets really confusing, and I wasn't intending on going into this video. I really wanted to stay to silver. I got all over the place. Too much coffee. This is UE in the morning with a cup of coffee, man. Don't ever ask me out to go drink coffee first thing in the morning, because you will never get a word in edgewise. Let's read some comments. All right, yeah, let's get it up to 100 likes. All right, get ready for war. Imagine 250,000 productive people, business moving overseas all in the same day. People should register for the Uneducated Economist University. Yes, absolutely. If you go to the link down in the description, check out the UE University. You get 7 days for free with it. The community is awesome. We are like discussing these type of things. Like, this is ultimately our focus, is to find and pinpoint and understand the credible threat theory for our own positions, to recognize it. We're having the conversation about it. I have the courses that you can go and look at all the speeches that I have used to develop the credible. It's not all the speeches, but it's enough of them to grasp the credible threat theory. I've highlighted all the spots. We have the discussion about it. And if you wanted to learn how it is that you can recognize some of the things within these articles, like we have here on the Uneducated Economist, you're going to want to be part of that UE University. And again, you get 7 days for free with it anyway. So what's the harm? And you can go and check it all out. We're constantly building up those courses. It's brand new, so it's, I mean, it's in its infancy right now, but it's all the materials there. Like, all the information I used is there, and I'm going to be adding to it going into the future. So, all right, moving on. Honestly, I'm glad that silver took a dump last night and then it got higher this morning. Everybody that I talked to thought metals were dumb. Now there are people scrambling to get what they can. Yeah, and see, now this is the fear and uncertainty and doubt that I don't like participating in. Like, to me, I'm just going to sit back and I'm going to wait for a while, because I mean, what am I going to, like, how much more can I add to my stack at $80 an ounce anyway? I mean, I would probably only be buying one or two pieces a month, if at best, if I was going to do it right now. So I like buying when it's at $20 an ounce, $30 an ounce, because then I can actually get a few of them to put into the stack. So when I see the volatility, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait till I see, stagnation in the market, where it finally, finds a plateau of some sort. At that point, then I probably will buy. And even if it's expensive, because I'm always trying to add to that insurance policy, always add to that stack. And the same thing with Bitcoin too. Like, and nobody's talking about Bitcoin, and it's way down comparatively to its highs. And so it's like, why don't you buy things that are unloved, unappreciated, and unnoticed? Don't buy things that are all high and expensive and noticed and excited. That's like dangerous territory, right? You want to buy things that are unnoticed and unloved. Back when silver was $20 and nobody talked about it, wouldn't you rather be there than here? Just saying. I mean, if you're already in it, then yeah, you want to be here. Like, I love firing it up and looking at the, like, how much did it rally today? $10. Right on. I mean, but what am I gonna do about it? I just plan on holding it anyway. But it's fun to watch. It's entertaining. All right, life is a scarcity mindset versus an abundance mindset. Absolutely, it is, and that's really the only difference between those who have and those who have not, is the way they think about it, and the feelings that they have about it. And because what ends up happening is the subconscious and the actions and everything else around you then conforms to your thoughts and beliefs and feelings. So if you're feeling scarcity, it will show up as scarcity. If you're feeling abundance, everything shows up in abundance. And I know it's so hard to think. And people who grew up in poverty and depression and, that whole mindset anyway, it's almost impossible. Like, it literally takes, like, probably therapy or something, I don't know, or just some really hardcore self reflection to understand that you grew up with this mindset and that it only exists in your mind, right? It doesn't exist in reality. Reality is anything you want it to be, right? And that's what's scary, right? And it's a world of pure imagination, right? If you if you want to see it, just dream it. And that's so odd to think and how that works, but it's really true. And I don't want to get into the woo-woo stuff because everybody here, we want to stay focused in on, what it is that we, are trying to do for ourselves in our life, and by recognizing the underlying economic forces in the economy that's playing out. We want to look at that, but we also have to understand that it's the feelings and the meanings that we have given that information. Right? I can give you the information all day long, but if you have taken it in such a way that is now damaging you because you're using it as essentially a reason to give evidence to the inequality and the horror that you're going to experience from, the elite power structure coming down with their new world order and stuff like that, you're going to see evidence of that out there, right? You're going to find that. That's the way the world's going to be to you. But you can also recognize what it is that's happening here and know that these underlying economic forces were expected, and that you can position yourself for this expectation. And that you're also expecting that if you don't put yourself into some sort of cash flowing asset, whether it's rental properties, dividend stocks, bonds, business, whatever, education, if you don't position yourself for that, then you can imagine that it's probably going to be very much a struggle going into the future, as the ability to acquire what you need is going to fall further and further and further away from its capabilities on your standard everyday job, right? If you don't increase your income, you'll deteriorate. Yeah. And I don't know what you're going to do about it. Like, there's nothing that can be done to stop it. So it's better to understand it and know that you got to do something about it. I like somebody who says, like, man, if you can't beat them, join them. Way to give up, bro. Right? And I'm like, I don't know where the hell that came from, but all right, if you want to be my competition and not do anything about this, then I'm trying to give you the tools that you need to understand on what it is that's happening. And if you can figure out a different way of doing it, go for it, man. Like, I can't stop these people. Right? Like, I can tell you that if they didn't get the inflationary expectation that they were looking for back as COVID was ramping up, if they did not get it, they would not have succeeded in saving their monetary policy. And I still see it today. People like pushing the inflationary story. They're like, oh man, the Fed causes this inflation, 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 inflation. And I'm like, you do realize that they wanted, needed, and desired elevated inflation and inflation expectation to save their monetary policy. And now that they have it, everybody wants to keep it. Everybody wants them to keep it. And they don't want to understand why it is that it's so painful an experience. And then they complain about it. You're causing all this inflation. It's so painful. And they're like, oh, we're sorry. It's too bad. They're literally laughing at you. And then you complain about the inflation, and then it causes the power structure to shift up there to the top again, and then they laugh in your face some more, and like, yeah, complain more about it. Yeah. It's one of the cruelest things that is happening out there, and you have to understand that they're not doing it on purpose. They just don't have any other choice. If they did anything else, they wouldn't exist. Yeah, they would, like, it's just like, hey man, you causing a lot of pain and suffering to everybody. You ever think about maybe not doing that? And they're like, oh well, here, hand me that 357. I'll just cap myself right now. Right? Like, that's the same thing. They're not going to do it. They're going to do what they are doing, and that is going to be ever increasing amounts of more debt, separation between the rich and the poor, and all that other stuff. So you have to figure out how it is that you can position yourself to deal with that. And anybody who's trying to sell you anything else that they can deal, like there's another way, there isn't. That's absolute. That's complete lie. There is no other way. Right? But you can do something about it for yourself, but you cannot stop these people. They're not going to do it. Right? All right, guys. What time is it? I'm gonna have to go to work soon. Yeah. All right, I gotta go. But you guys are awesome. What time is it? 3 a.m.? No, it is now 6:30, and I gotta take off for work here in 20 minutes. All real wealth comes from the ground. That's true, it does. All right, but you guys are awesome. We have 341 people watching with 110 likes. Do me a favor, go hit that like button. The first few minutes, a half hour of this video or whatever we did was an absolute awesome treasure trove of information, and I think it's great understanding and philosophy that we are going through here in order to get to a better position for yourself or your family and everything else that's going on out there, to recognize these underlying economic forces. Like that AP article, if that isn't a modern day description of the Cantillon effect, I don't know what is, right? I mean, it's just straight up right out of this 250, I don't even know how, I'm 250 years old now, essay on economic theory. When you see it, you recognize it, you know how it is that you can deal with it because you can see the forces. You just know it. You're not blaming anybody or hopeful or wishful. You just know. All right. Uneducated economist. You guys let me know. Thank you, UE. Enjoyed the stream. Yeah, thank you guys. Come back at noontime around, I don't know, 11:30 noon. Well, Eastern time, it would be what, 3? All right. Uneducated economist. You let me know.